George Nathaniel Curzon, 1st Marquess Curzon of Kedleston KG, GCSI, GCIE, PC, known as the Lord Curzon of Kedleston between 1898 and 1911 and as the Earl Curzon of Kedleston between 1911 and 1921, was a British Conservative statesman. As Viceroy of India, he is noted for the creation of Eastern Bengal and Assam. As Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, he drew the Curzon Line as the proposed eastern frontier of Poland. He was passed over as Prime Minister in 1923 in favour of Stanley Baldwin. His character polarized opinion amongst his contemporaries, so gratitude and resentment along his path with equally lavish hands. He quarreled endlessly, and his arrogance and inflexibility made even more enemies. Critics have been negative in contrasting his enormous talents and energy on behalf of British imperialism with his mixed results and unrealized ambitions. Early life. Lord Curzon was the eldest son and second of 11 children of Alfred Curzon, the 4th Baron Scarsdale, rector of Kedleston in Derbyshire, and his wife Blanche, daughter of Joseph Pocklington Senhouse of Netherhall in Cumberland. He was born at Kedleston Hall, built on the site where his family, who were of Norman ancestry, had lived since the 12th century. His mother, worn out by childbirth, died when George was 16. Her husband survived her by 41 years. Neither parent exerted a major influence on Curzon's life. Lord Scarsdale was an austere and unindulgent father who believed in the short-held family tradition that landowners should stay on the land and not go roaming about all over the world. He thus had little sympathy for those journeys across Asia between 1887 and 1895 which made his son one of the most travelled men who ever sat in a British cabinet. A more decisive presence in Curzon's childhood was that of his brutal governess, Ellen Mary Parrman, whose tyranny in the nursery stimulated his combative qualities and encouraged the obsessional side of his nature. Parrman periodically forced him to parade through the village wearing a conical hat bearing the words liar, sneak, and coward. Curzon later noted, "No children well born and well placed ever cried so much and so justly." Quote, he was educated at Wixenford School, Eton College and Balliol College, Oxford. At Eton he was a favourite of Oscar Browning, an over-intimate relationship that led to his tutor's dismissal. While at Eton, he was a controversial figure who was liked and disliked with equal intensity by large numbers of masters and other boys. This strange talent for both attraction and repulsion stayed with him all his life. Few people ever felt neutral about him. At Oxford he was president of the Union and secretary of the Oxford Canning Club. Although he failed to achieve a first-class degree in grades, he won the Lothian and Arnold Prizes, the latter for an essay on Sir Thomas More. He was elected a Prize Fellow of All Souls College in 1883. Whilst at Oxford, he was a contemporary and close friend of Cecil Spring Rice and Edward Grey. A teenage spinal injury, incurred while riding, left Curzon in lifelong pain, often resulting in insomnia, and required him to wear a metal corset, contributing to an unfortunate impression of stiffness and arrogance. While at Oxford, Curzon was the inspiration for the following Balliol rhyme, a piece of doggerel which stuck with him in later life. My name is George Nathaniel Curzon, I am a most superior person. My cheeks are pink, my hair is sleek, I dine at Blenheim once a week. Early political career. Curzon became Assistant Private Secretary to Lord Salisbury in 1885, and in 1886 entered Parliament as member for Southport in southwest Lancashire. His maiden speech, which was chiefly an attack on Home Rule and Irish nationalism, was regarded in much the same way as his oratory at the Oxford Union brilliant and eloquent but also presumptuous and rather too self-assured. Subsequent performances in the Commons, often dealing with Islander reform at the House of Lords, received similar verdicts. He was Under Secretary of State for India in 1891–92 and Under Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs in 1895–98. Asian Travels and Writings. In the meantime he had travelled around the world, Russia and Central Asia, a long tour of Persia, Siam, French Indochina and Korea, and a daring foray into Afghanistan and the Pamirs, and published several books describing Central and Eastern Asia and related policy issues. A bold and compulsive traveller, fascinated by Oriental life and geography, he was awarded the Patrons Gold Medal of the Royal Geographical Society for his exploration of the source of the Amudarya. His journeys allowed him to study the problems of Asia and their implications for British India, whilst reinforcing his pride in his nation and her imperial mission. Curzon believed Russia to be the most likely threat to India, Britain's most valuable colony, from the 19th century through the early 20th century. In 1879, Russia had begun construction of the Trans-Caspian Railroad along the Silk Road, officially solely to enforce local control. The line starts from the city of Kzyzl, travels southeast along the Karakum Desert, through Ashgabat, continues along the Kopet-Dagh Mountains until it reaches Tedjen. Curzon dedicated an entire chapter in his book Russia in Central Asia to discussing the perceived threat to British control of India. This railroad connected Russia with the most wealthy and influential cities in Central Asia at the time, including the Persian province of Khorasan, and would allow the rapid deployment of Russian supplies and troops into the area. Curzon also believed that the resulting greater economic interdependence between Russia and Central Asia would be damaging to British interests. Persia and the Persian Question, written in 1892, has been considered Curzon's magnum opus and can be seen as a sequel to Russia in Central Asia. Curzon was commissioned by the Times to write several articles on the Persian political environment, but while there he decided to write a book on the country as whole. This two-volume work covers Persia's history and governmental structure, as well as graphics, maps and pictures. Curzon was aided by General Albert Houghton Schindler and the Royal Geographical Society, both of which helped him gain access to material to which as a foreigner he would not have been entitled to have access. General Schindler provided Curzon with information regarding Persia's geography and resources, as well as serving as an unofficial editor. The map which accompanied the volumes was the product of radek.s, but was later pointed out as inaccurate as it depicted the islands near the Straits of Hormuz as belonging to the Persians. Curzon was appalled by his government's apathy towards Persia as a valuable defensive buffer to India from Russian encroachment. Years later Curzon would lament that Persia has alternatively advanced and receded in the estimation of British statesmen, occupying now a position of extravagant prominence, anon one of unmerited obscurity. First marriage. In 1895 he married Mary Victoria Leiter, the daughter of Levi Ziegler Leiter, an American millionaire of German Mennonite origin and co-founder of the Chicago department store Field and Amp Leiter. She had a long and nearly fatal illness near the end of summer 1904, from which she never really recovered. Falling ill again in July 1906, she died on the 18th of that month in her husband's arms, at the age of 36. It was the greatest personal loss of his life. She was buried in the church at Kedleston, where Curzon designed his memorial for her, a Gothic chapel added to the north side of the nave. Although he was neither a devout nor a conventional churchman, Curzon retained a simple religious faith. In later years he sometimes said that he was not afraid of death because it would enable him to join Mary in heaven. They had 3 daughters during a firm and happy marriage: Mary Irene, who inherited her father's barony of Ravensdale and was created a life peer in her own right; Cynthia, who became the first wife of politician Sir Oswald Mosley; and Alexandra Nildera, who married Edward Fruity Metcalfe, the best friend, best man and equerry of Edward VIII. Mosley exercised a strange fascination for the Curzon women. Irene had a brief romance with him before either were married. Barbara became his mistress, and Curzon's second wife, Grace, had a long affair with him. Viceroy of India. In January 1899 he was appointed Viceroy of India. He was created a peer of Ireland as Baron Curzon of Kedleston, in the county of Derby, on his appointment. This peerage was created in the Peerage of Ireland so that he would be free, until his father's death, to re-enter the House of Commons on his return to Britain, reaching India shortly after the suppression of the frontier risings of 1897 to 98. He paid special attention to the independent tribes of the Northwest Frontier, inaugurated a new province called the Northwest Frontier Province, and pursued a policy of forceful control mingled with conciliation. The only major armed outbreak on this frontier during the period of his administration was the Masood Waziri campaign of 1901. In the context of the Great Game between the British and Russian empires for control of Central Asia, he held deep mistrust of Russian intentions. This led him to encourage British trade in Persia, and he paid a visit to the Persian Gulf in 1903. Curzon argued for an exclusive British presence in the Gulf, a policy originally proposed by John Malcolm. The British government was already making agreements with local sheikhs, tribal leaders along the Persian Gulf coast to this end. Curzon had convinced his government to establish Britain as the unofficial protector of Kuwait with the Anglo-Kuwaiti Agreement of 1899. The Lansdowne Declaration in 1903 stated that the British would counter any other European power's attempt to establish a military presence in the Gulf. Only 4 years later this position was abandoned and the Persian Gulf declared a neutral zone in the Anglo-Russian Agreement of 1907, prompted in part by the high economic cost of defending India from Russian advances. At the end of 1903, Curzon sent a British expedition to Tibet under Francis Younghusband, ostensibly to forestall a Russian advance. After bloody conflicts with Tibet's poorly armed defenders, the mission penetrated to Lhasa, where a treaty was signed in September 1904. No Russian presence was found in Lhasa. During his tenure, Curzon undertook the restoration of the Taj Mahal, and expressed satisfaction that he had done so. Within India, Curzon appointed a number of commissions to inquire into education, irrigation, police and other branches of administration, on whose reports legislation was based. During his second term of office as Viceroy, reappointed Governor-General in August 1904, he presided over the 1905 partition of Bengal, which roused such bitter opposition among the people of the province that it was later revoked. Indian Army. Curzon also took an active interest in military matters. In 1901, he founded the Imperial Cadet Corps, or ICC. The ICC was a corps d'élite, designed to give Indian princes and aristocrats military training, after which a few would be given officer commissions in the Indian Army. But these commissions were special commissions, which did not empower the holders to command any troops. Predictably, this was a major stumbling block to the ICC's success, as it caused much resentment among former cadets. Though the ICC closed in 1914, it was a crucial stage in the drive to Indianize the Indian Army's officer corps, which was haltingly begun in 1917. Military organization proved to be the final issue faced by Curzon in India. This was in part a clash of personalities. Curzon once wrote on a document, "I rise from the perusal of these papers filled with the sense of the ineptitude of my military advisers," and once wrote to the Commander-in-Chief in India, Lord Kitchener, advising him that signing himself Lord Kitchener of Khartoum took up too much time and space, which Kitchener thought petty. A difference of opinion with Kitchener regarding the status of the military member of the Council in India led to a controversy in which Curzon failed to obtain the support of the home government. He resigned in August 1905 and returned to England. The Indian Famine, a major famine, coincided with Curzon's time as Viceroy, in which 1 to 4.5 million people died. Large parts of India were affected and millions died, and Curzon has been criticized for allegedly having done little to fight the famine. Curzon did, however, implement a variety of measures, including opening up famine relief works that fed between 3 and 5 million, reducing taxes and spending vast amounts of money on irrigation works. However, Curzon did state any government which imperiled the financial position of India in the interests of prodigal philanthropy would be open to serious criticism, but any government which by indiscriminate alms-giving weakened the fibre and demoralized the self-reliance of the population would be guilty of a public crime. Quote, he also cut back rations that he characterized as dangerously high, and stiffened relief eligibility by reinstating the Temple tests. Return to Britain. Arthur Balfour's refusal to recommend an earldom for Curzon in 1905 was repeated by Sir Henry Campbell Bannerman, the Liberal Prime Minister, who formed his government the day after Curzon returned to England. In deference to the wishes of the King and the advice of his doctors, Curzon did not stand in the general election of 1906 and thus found himself excluded from public life for the first time in 20 years. It was at this time, the nadir of his career, that he suffered the greatest personal loss of his life. Mary died in 1906 and Curzon devoted himself to private matters, including establishing a new home. After the death of Lord Curzon in 1907, the post of Chancellor of the Oxford University fell vacant. Curzon successfully became elected as Chancellor of Oxford after he won by 1,001 votes to 440 against Lord Rosebery. He proved to be quite an active Chancellor, threw himself so energetically into the cause of university reform that critics complained he was ruling Oxford like an Indian province. House of Lords. In 1908, Curzon was elected a representative peer for a while and thus relinquished any idea of returning to the House of Commons. In 1909–10 he took an active part in opposing the Liberal government's proposal to abolish the legislative veto of the House of Lords, and in 1911 was created Baron Ravensdale of Ravensdale in the county of Derby, was remainder to his daughters, Viscounts Scarsdale of Scarsdale in the county of Derby, was remainder to the heirs male of his father, and Earl Curzon of Kedleston in the county of Derby, with the normal remainder, all in the peerage of the United Kingdom. He became involved with saving Tattershall Castle, Lincolnshire, from destruction. This experience strengthened his resolve for heritage protection. He was one of the sponsors of the Ancient Monuments Consolidation and Amendment Act 1913. On 5 May 1914, he spoke out against a bill in the House of Lords that would have permitted women who already had the right to vote in local elections the right to vote for members of Parliament. First World War. Curzon joined the cabinet as Lord Privy Seal when Asquith formed his coalition in May 1915. Like other politicians, Curzon favoured British Empire efforts in Mesopotamia, believing that the increase in British prestige would discourage a German-inspired Muslim revolt in India. Curzon was a member of the Dardanelles Committee and told that body that the recent Salonika expedition was quixotic chivalry. Early in 1916, Curzon visited Douglas Haig at his headquarters in France. Haig was impressed by Curzon's brains and decisiveness, considering that he had mellowed since his days as Viceroy and had lost his old pompous ways. Curzon served in Lloyd George's small war cabinet as leader of the House of Lords from December 1916, and he also served on the War Policy Committee. With Allied victory over Germany far from certain, Curzon wrote a paper for the War Cabinet urging that Britain seize Palestine and possibly Syria. However, like other members of the War Cabinet, Curzon supported further Western Front offensives lest, with Russian commitment to the war wavering, France and Italy be tempted to make a separate peace. At the War Policy Committee, Curzon objected in vain to plans to redeploy 2 divisions to Palestine, with a view to advancing into Syria and knocking Turkey out of the war altogether. Curzon's commitment wavered somewhat as the losses of Third Ypres mounted. In the summer of 1917, the 6th General Robertson sent Haig a biting description of the members of the War Cabinet, who he said were all frightened of Lloyd George. He described Curzon as a gas bag. During the crisis of February 1918, Curzon was one of the few members of the government to support Robertson, threatening in vain to resign if he were removed. Despite his continued opposition to votes for women, the House of Lords voted conclusively in its favour. Second marriage. After a long affair with the romantic novelist Eleanor Glynn, Curzon married the former Grace Elvina Hines in January 1917. She was the wealthy Alabama-born widow of Alfredo Huberto Duggan, a first-generation Irish-Argentinian appointed to the Argentine legation in London in 1905. Eleanor Glynn was staying with Curzon at the time of the engagement, and read about it in the morning newspapers. Grace had 3 children from her first marriage, 2 sons, Alfred and Hubert, and a daughter, Grace Lucille. Alfred and Hubert, as Curzon's stepsons, grew up within his influential circle. Curzon had 3 daughters from his first marriage, but he and Grace did not have any children together, which put a strain on the marriage. Letters written between them in the early 1920s imply that they still lived together and remained devoted to each other. In 1923, Curzon was passed over for the office of Prime Minister partly on the advice of Arthur Balfour, who joked that Curzon has lost the hope of glory but he still possesses the means of grace. In 1917, Curzon bought Bodiam Castle in East Sussex, a 14th-century building that had been gutted during the English Civil War. He restored it extensively, then bequeathed it to the National Trust.